Hello everyone, Revan619 here. I hope you're all having the best day. Today I wanted to give some more feedback following up from my review of the Dark Heresy beta, and in the background I'll be showing the Valkyrie fight on hard at level 5 rather than level 8 because I was playing around some new builds and I finally have a setup where I'm not abusing fire grenades with Sarrow or a sail to get through the encounter, so I thought it'd make for good background footage. So some of the feedback that I've aimed to give the developers is explaining that las weapons are not armor penetrating weapons. This is one of the first things I'd like to see them improve going into the full release of the game, because currently las weapons do far too much armor damage and it's causing a lot of trouble for the party, because on hard difficulty especially you take a lot of morale loss, which leads to snowballing. Snowballing is going to be the theme of discussion as per the title, so we're going to talk about a little bit more about that. The way things currently work in the beta is if you have no armor and you take a hit, you suffer morale damage if it's from a single target attack. Not so much from burst or area, though they can do injuries which can also lead to that. Which means that we're building into more snowballing issues the second your party gets their entire armor shred and then the enemy starts taking you down. If you lose even one ally, you are in a lot of trouble, so you have to work very hard not to lose allies. This then comes back to my second point, which is warriors are far too delicate. They're meant to be your frontline fighter and they do struggle quite a bit of movement. If you use charge, you lose access to endure, and you do need to armor gate in this, because if you're taking hits whilst not starting with armor, you really suffer. Even when you're stacking defenses, I've had scenarios where I've got my characters up to 60 defense and they're still often getting hit. This is also because when you have no armor, if you have an attack coming at you, it can randomly do body parts damage. In the case of this, it ignores your defenses, so you get automatically hit. Soldiers need a little bit more work. The only way a soldier can really do damage is, as per my build that's on the screen, is a Santic warrior psyker using a lot of the buffs for Sword of Faith. So at least you'll be glad to find out Sword of Faith is really good this time around. But it means that my warrior kind of needs to rely on that to do need good damage. It also means I'm using daggers a lot to bypass armor, because it is incredibly powerful if you're going straight for the head. You'll notice Lethea, when you get his dagger, will also be incredibly potent this way, so he will pair up with this build really well. However, the companions that you get as warriors, being Cog and Hypatia, they don't have access to being able to switch weapon types, which means that they're stuck with one weapon, which can be either an armor damaging weapon or it can be a wounds damaging weapon. Ideally, warriors would have access to both if they're not using knives to bypass armor, so Hypatia could really use that to not suffer as much. Though the setup I'm using is I'm trying to clear armor to use her toxin ability, because she's very good at killing trash mobs, whereas Cog suffers just a little bit and he tends to get one turn because of just how squishy warriors are, and how all las weapons having armor pen on them just causes them to get absolutely annihilated. So warriors do need to see some more survivability, and they also need to have their abilities not be dependent of each other when it comes to charge and endure, and I think endure needs to be able to restore more. Yes, there's a fine line between trying not to make warriors unkillable, but at the same time we need to not have it that they're just too squishy all the time. My next biggest complaint is soldiers. Burst fire, when you're using barrage, which is the only reliable way to actually get your burst fires, is entirely single target. If the enemy dies on your first shot barrage, you don't do the second one, so it's essentially just wasted. But more importantly, because it's single target, they just don't have the action economy to kill anything. As you can see here, I mostly don't even use soldiers in my party, because it's better to just have another officer, which can be given extra turns to your psyker or someone else that's doing more on the team than even bothering with a soldier. The only reason you see Epione get a pass is because she has very good healing abilities, so it's her utility which keeps her in the party. Even though area damage is incredibly low damage, she can still help clear trash mobs, and she can use fire to spread burning for Sarrows to actually then do the killing, because the real AoE damage dealer is actually psykers. So what I would like to see is burst fire not be single target, maybe fire at random enemies within the cone, and I'd like to see a buff to area damage to make soldiers more reliable. We can talk about more improvements a little bit later, but for now I'm just going to talk about some of the issues that they have. Now, the only reliable crowd control that you currently have is psykers using Assail. The only reliable CC that they can really give is Telekinetic Dome, which is in itself very weak, as is Barrier. Barrier and Telekinetic Dome are probably going to need buffs, but more importantly, we need to see more CC. I will, like I said, talk a little bit more about some suggestions for that, but right now, they're planning to even nerf Assail, so you can't crutch on that so much, which... yes, that's going to be a bit of an issue, but it's why for this version of the encounter I was trying not to use it too much. But psykers are very good. I do like their push and fetter abilities to be able to control Veil, though I feel like even using push once seems to ramp up Veil too quickly, so you do have to manage that very carefully. But it is a really good mechanic, so we're very happy to see that on psykers, but I do feel like that because they're so strong that they might get nerfs, and if they do, they'll take away more player options. Officers then have an issue with their entire kit that then plays into hard mode itself. So officers have access to a lot of morale manipulation, and morale manipulation is very strong. However, currently when you go for hard mode, your positive gain and enemies' negative gain takes a -1. Due to this, any ability, talent or item currently in the game that only changes morale manipulation by 1 now doesn't work. Now this I could see being better for unfair, but when you get to the point for unfair, it's like going to be -2, which will essentially delete all of officers' kit, making them just a glorified extra turn giver, which is still very strong in itself, but there does need to be that sort of minimum 1 to it, and the devs have said that they might consider doing this, and who knows, we might even see a hotfix to fix that. But the biggest issue around enemies getting additional morale and your party losing more morale is the fact that it turns into this snowballing thing. Once the party starts losing morale, you'll be negative morale for the entire fight, which will cause you to struggle and lose. One member goes down and you might as well reload, because then you'll start suffering from so many morale issues, the enemy will just keep steamrolling you. Every time that they get 10 morale, they ignore your defenses, and likely they will one-shot you. You do have some options to fix this, but not many. So ideally, we don't want enemies just completely draining morale all the time. And I think in order not to completely remove officers' kit so they do more than just give extra turns, I don't think morale should be nerfed for the higher difficulties. Maybe a -1 for unfair, which is the current situation for hard, but I would like to see them try to balance it around interesting mechanics. Right now, the mechanics and secondary mechanics for almost every encounter are the worst. I do not enjoy them. I think that they need a lot of improvement. Yes, they're all seemingly adding something different, but essentially every combat is just fighting infinite waves of trash mobs that do way too much damage, take too long to kill. Everyone's very single target, so you're forced to rely mostly on psykers to get through them. We just need more options for everyone, and we can talk about some of those options and what I'd like to see happen to start improving it. Ideally, warriors would start getting the ability to be more tanky. I want them to have the ability to be able to survive up front, because chances are they're not going to be in cover and they're going to be the main targets. Yes, the idea that maybe warriors shouldn't be out of cover, okay, but if they're tying up enemies and they're out of cover, let them use those enemies as cover. Give them an ability that I can use enemies and they count as cover for me, so people trying to shoot will accidentally shoot their allies unless they're like snipers taking very precise shots, and even then give it penalties for me being in melee. Don't link charge and endure to each other, and give endure a way to restore more health. Currently, yeah, warriors are too squishy. Like, as you can see here, in just one turn, my warrior mostly got chunked, and there's very little that you can do to recover it, because you only have access to 1 Medicae and 1 armor restore, and if you do that, you also lose the ability to be using grenades, and grenades are very important, so you do want to have access to a lot of those tools. So ideally, like I said, make warriors a little bit more tanky, so they're not only being forced to stick with restore items, which as it currently is, it's a bit rocket taggy. I have to kill enemies very quickly before they kill me, because if I don't, my party will go down and get snowballed very quickly. Whilst I think medium armor's fine, and I do like that it gets some good defensive properties from medium armor specialists, light armor does need some armor, because not having any armor at all is just suicidal, because it causes you to take injuries, morale loss, and have RNG to have your defense ignored, so light's not very viable. Heavy armor, having a defense cap of 25, I think is too harsh. I think a better way to do this is the weaker heavy armors should have no defense cap. Then as you start getting higher damage mitigation, slowly start adding in defensive caps. Maybe start at 60 when you've got, say, 30% damage reduction. And if you go up to 50% damage reduction, then maybe you could put a limit of 40, so on and so forth. But right now, I think the 25 is too harsh, even for daring hard and any other things that might come, especially when it comes to unfair, because I think currently with las weapons randomly being arm penetrating, heavy armor is not viable to use even on hard, let alone any other future difficulties that may come. I think we also need a lot more options when it comes to CC and crowd control. Whilst I've talked about potentially having an entire build for a hybrid mixed arms attacker, which not in this video but in other videos and other places, a good solution to this could be, when you're using a sword and pistol, is give them special little CC abilities that aren't really full attacks, such as a shot that can come off from the pistol to give enemies some debuffs as you're about to run in for your melee, and if you have a melee out, then give them negatives to enemies also trying to move away and shoot you. Yes, you already get an attack of opportunity, but it could be a little bit more. I'd like to see the developers being a little bit more creative with this to making those sort of mixed arms more viable, because currently you either want 2 melee weapons or 2 ranged weapons depending if you're a warrior or soldier, so giving them more interesting abilities around that would be quite good. And even maybe warrior having a special ability that if you have combined arms, that like I said, you can get those special attacks, you can get an additional attack which would be a shots debuff before you then charge in and then follow up with your standard melee attack. Something like that where they can get a little bit more creative with it. Soldiers need to have their burst fire reworked. I think that you should select a primary target, but if that primary target dies and you still have your second shot of barrage, it should move to a different target within that area. This will help you clear through some trash mobs, and it will stop soldier being so single target. And rapid fire probably should be reworked to be more of an overwatch ability. Let it be set up so it can control a zone, that if any enemies try to move through it or take actions within it, that you get to shoot for them until you come back around to your next turn. That will give soldiers some CC and make them a lot more interesting. I'd like to see them have access to traps to work more in with the catechin stuff. I would like to see them have deployable cover, and something that could be reworked a little bit to give them a reason to have a melee, such as if you score a melee kill, maybe you can use the knife to then make a throwing attack at someone within your distance. So just something that makes it a little bit more worthwhile. I know that that's a pretty weak example of what you could do with having a soldier using a knife, but I think that a knife for a soldier is quite thin, and there is more that you can do with it. And you only need to look at, say, Dawn of War 2 with the Catechin jungle fighters that use shotguns, and when they go into melee they pull out these power melee knives. Having access to traps and deployable cover would make soldiers feel a lot better, but I think there is other crowd control options you could give them. But we will be wanting to see a buff to area weapons as well. Shotguns should do some sort of CC with knockback like they do in Rogue Trader. Melters should just be way stronger, and flamers should be stronger as well. I would also like that for when a soldier uses, say, a plasma rifle, it should be just a straight up upgrade to that of a burst fire lasgun, because traditionally you will see that plasmas are meant to be the anti-armor option, and they're meant to be stronger versions of lasguns. Yes, it's not going to rapid fire like a actual rapid fire weapon, which is where most of the strength of soldiers comes from, is stacking rate of fire, but it would be good if it was something that was quite useful as being stronger for armor and also having that pseudo area attack. I think their area attack and their overcharge shot should be the same ability. I think the area attack should do enhanced damage, and that way that you have an effective way to do splash damage and just be more potent than having these two different attacks that often you're not going to want to use one or the other, but combining them would be a lot more powerful in my opinion. Currently, operatives are great. I like the changes they've done for melee operative, but I would like to see close encounters be useful for a ranged operative, where you could use it to get out of melee instead of just going into melee. Maybe if you're engaged in melee, you can use it to get out of melee and it gives a debuff to those enemies. Just like how if you use it to engage in melee, it debuffs enemies that way. That'd just be something a little bit more interesting, and giving them more traps. I know on the tabletop, some assassins and operatives have abilities where enemies at certain ranges can't damage them based on their war gear. They have the ability to use some sort of tech-based traps. I think there's a lot more interesting stuff that you could do rather than operative just being high single target damage, and maybe even use the fact of their tech use to work with their abilities. In Rogue Trader, the exposed weakness is just a random ability that you point at someone who loses stats, whereas realistically, I think that ability should have been they throw an ionized grenade to strip enemy armor, and that way it would have been something especially for them. Mystics are already really strong in terms of damage for pyromancy, and it has some interesting CC, which I do think some of the telekinesis stuff does need buffing, but there's a lot more that we can do here. There is obviously lightning abilities, biomancy abilities, knockback abilities. I want to see force waves to be able to just throw enemies around like you see librarians doing in Dawn of War. Just a lot more stuff like that to make it more interesting, and potentially it might also want some specializations that aren't tied to powers, just because they do have abilities where their melee weapons can get enhanced, but right now, if you're not playing on a warrior, that's not very effective. It'd be good to see having just an option where they can be sort of a gun-based character, but like I said, for the love of all that is good, please give light armor just some armor so they don't just constantly take morale damage and constantly get injured. There are points, as I was talking about earlier in the snowballing, where you can just take leg injuries once your armor's gone, and then your whole party can't move for the rest of the encounter. Once that happens, that's it, game over. You've got no counterplay, you're just standing still until you eventually die, so that's not very good for a lot of the snowballing. When it comes to officers, like I said earlier, having that minimum 1 on their abilities, items, and anything to do with morale for harder difficulties is a must, but I think the -1 that we currently see in hard should be exclusive to unfair, because it does really stand out and it cuts the effectiveness of officers in half. You don't want to overgut it. Yes, I know officers is very powerful given extra turns and we're all a little bit scared of it, but let's not lean into over nerfing it too much. But these are the sort of ideas that I've had coming back from playing the beta. I would be very interesting to see what you guys have to say about it, and sort of what you guys have been playing and what sort of builds you've been looking at. For those of you who have been more interested in the background footage for the Valkyrie fight, let's talk about this a little bit so I can tell you what I'm doing. One of the things that I noticed was Sword of Faith was incredibly strong at stacking additional damage to knives, which can just bypass stuff. As you can see, I'm doing 50 plus damage on just regular hits and absolutely demolishing mid-tier enemies that soldiers and warriors normally struggle to kill. This is incredibly strong, and I hope it isn't nerfed. The premise of the build is basically stacking weapon skill to damage, stacking willpower to damage, and then stacking my defense to damage, and eventually it'll go into 2-weapon fighting. For hard, I went for medium armor specialist, then dual weapon specialist, but I think on lower difficulties you could do it the other way around, no problem. And I even came to the Lucid Palace first to prove that just how strong the setup is. And as you can see, I've completely dropped Hamar and I've gone with double officers, because the double officers being able to give my psyker, my main damage dealer, the warrior, extra turns is kind of how I'm clearing this encounter. If I tried to do this with Cog would have just died. If I tried to do this with just Hypatia would have just died. They both needed officer support to keep going. If I had an operative, operatives can do incredibly high damage, especially one in melee. Once per turn, they could also be killing one medium tier enemy, but again, they need to be babysat by a officer to do that, which is why officers' extra turns is so important, especially when you're dealing with these big swarms here. I can't really stack the damage without just focusing the damage dealers that I am using to stack and giving extra turns to debuff enemies with Sarrow. Sarrow is definitely the MVP. If he goes down early in this encounter, that's GG, you just gotta re-roll. Funny enough, after my stream yesterday, this was the first time I tried this encounter again, and I even forgot to bring my fire grenades. That's why I had to play this a little bit more honestly. And a couple of turns ago, I thought Sarah was going to get hit by the rockets of the Valkyrie, so I was like, oh great, I'm going to have to re-roll. But luckily that didn't happen, and I managed to beat this encounter in just one go. I even used the Valkyrie to help me destroy the zipline, so by turn 4, when the Commissar showed up, I'd completely cleared the map. Now, the Commissar himself, his whole mechanic is just evil. He will randomly, when he attacks you, get 10 morale and give the entire map 10 morale. This means that he can very easily just take out your party, and there's not much you can do it. He is so strong. Now, he's not as strong if you come here at level 5, because as you can see, his stats not the highest, but he has 600 health if you come back here at level 8. I think that the way they balance the bosses when you go there second is currently flawed. They can't algorithmically boost it like this, and I think it's going to need to be handcrafted. One of the mistakes that they made with the 1.5 patch of Rogue Trader is they just randomly used an algorithm to boost all the skill checks. Owlcat, please do not get lazy. Manually set everything in the game. Manually set all the stats for every encounter. If there's 2 paths, you have to manually set it. You can't just be like, 30% buff should be fine, and that should match the player levels. The scaling is not so direct with levels, and there are different breakpoints from when different things become effective. So yes, they need to be very careful with that. At the moment, I'm using Hypatia in medium armor because I haven't got access to be able to have heavy armor, because she starts with dual weapon fighting specialization. I think that entire mechanic for her is quite bad, actually, because most guns for her she's going to have low hit chance with, and that means you really want like an area pistol to use her. Like the Doom Flamer seems to have its stats swapped, so the pistol has range of 8 whereas the rifle has range of 4, but that pistol on Hypatia would be very good to be burning people she's fighting. The current area attack on Messiah Axes was bugged, they've just fixed it, but it's really bad compared to say that of hammers because it's so short. Whilst her gimmick is kind of fun, spreading toxin, there does need to be a little bit more reliable ways to use it, but I'm not hating it. I like the concept, but I think her gun arm needs improvement. It's the same issue I had with Pascal. Being a warrior, she really wants 2 melees. She wants to be able to switch between different melee weapons, and if she has a specific gun arm, give it special mechanics. Make the bullets scale from her intelligence. Make her be able to use any 2-handed gun in melee, because that really plays into what those servo guns do. So definitely look at some ideas for that is one thing I would suggest to Owlcat, and there is, like I said, there's a lot more that you could do with it, so just get creative. And I'd like to see more tech-based stuff come in for Hypatia, so she's not just a warrior with a toxin mechanic. She does feel a little bit underbaked compared to the other companions, and that's kind of the same with Cog. Cog really needs shields and some interesting shield mechanics, so that way he can have cover for himself and he can act as cover for allies better, and it can stop over penetration, and just the fact that he can have a opportunity to have more armor, but like he really does want that armor restore a little bit more. But going back to this encounter, as you can see, I'm using both officers to just really stack up, and I'm trying to make sure I don't lose a single party, and this is why Epione is so good. A few people who saw my server was like, why do you think Epione is so good? And just look how much she is doing for me. Look how good all of her stuff is here, because she spreads a lot of debuffs, even if area damage is pretty low, but then she's keeping up my party stats, she's keeping up their defenses, and I'm just genuinely using her to heal, and that is very vital. HP management, CC, crowd control management, in this game where you're fighting endless swarms that can delete you so fast, like even basic 8 HP enemies can take out one turn one of your companions so easily if you just get unfortunate RNG rolls, and I don't think encounters should really be balanced with RNG. As you can see, I'm using a sail to keep one person stunned. Some people don't like that that works like that. I don't think it's too game breaking to have a single person CC like that. Yeah, stuns can be very strong, and yes, some bosses they don't work on, like the Commissar here, which is why he's so hard to fight if you come here on the second part when he has like 400 plus health, because it's very hard to kill him before he wipes out your party. As you can see, I've had to be very smart with how I've managed the game, and tactical gameplay like this is good, but it's still rocket tag. I don't want to see rocket tag to be the main way that we're balancing this. So I do think that a little bit more improvement could go into that. And yes, the devs are listening. They have seen my 2 Reddit feedback posts. So I hope that they will put in some more interesting stuff. But as you can see here, my warrior there survived. But on if I'd come back here on the level 8 encounter, probably would have just got one-shotted by the commissar there. And as you can see, I forgot about my Inquisitor's ability with my sigil, which I realized at the end of the turn here to be like, oh yes, I can remove heroic from the enemies. Being able to do that on one person isn't so bad, but the fact that the commissar gives map-wide this sort of +10, rather than him hitting you, if you really want him to have that mechanic where he suddenly gives the entire map that +10, make him shoot and kill one of his team members to do that, because, you know, that's kind of how a commissar works. That would make things way more thematic, and it would add an extra layer to the encounter that he can obviously give a map-wide buff by killing his own people. So I think that'd be a better way to do that sort of mechanic here. But as you can see, wrapping up the encounter, haven't lost anyone, barely even picked up any injuries, but yeah, the level of play that I've had to put into here is probably everything I've had to learn beta, that's nice to see. So I think it's a good job's been done, but there is still a lot of improvement to go. I hope you enjoyed the video, but that's all I've got for today.